There are two very different approaches to Batman that coexist in our minds, and many times we don't even realize it. On one hand, we have a very human Batman who confronts crime in Gotham City in these detective stories, and who sometimes struggles and has many problems to defeat adversaries as human as he is, like Two-Face or the Riddler. On the other hand, we have this much more powerful Batman, a mastermind who, through his plans and brilliant strategies, is capable of defeating Superman, the entire Justice League, and practically any person or god who stands in his way because, well, he's Batman. If you add to this a magical armor or the Joker, then you have as a result a Batman who is capable of putting the entire DC universe in check. However, this was not always the case, as over the years Batman's power levels have been changing. The question here is, when did he start to become so powerful? And above all, why? Hello geekers, how are you? I am Go, the Geek Monitor, and I welcome you to a new video essay. If it's your first time on the channel, I'll tell you that here I like to take comics very seriously, and we analyze them in depth to be able to see beyond the obvious. Today we are going to analyze how Batman's power levels have changed over the years. And also why this happens, so that in the end you tell me in the comments if you think DC has already gone too far with Batman's power levels. Like every superhero, the version of Batman we know today is very different from the one we saw in his first appearance. In the beginning, Batman was this extremely dark character that directly derived from low-budget stories called pulp magazines, which featured violent and crime stories that were popular in the mid-30s. This made his early stories have a detective focus that was common in this type of comics, where Batman regularly faced common criminals and the occasional villain with some special characteristic like Joker or Catwoman. And yes, this was Catwoman's first suit. Apparently subtlety was not her thing. However, all these villains, despite their peculiar costumes, were simply human. That is, in the early Batman stories we didn't see superpowers anywhere, so we saw more of the detective side of the character in play, and when he faced off in fights against criminals like Joker or even any gang, it was hard for him to win. A couple of years later, DC decided it was time to bring together its two biggest superheroes, Batman and Superman, in a single comic for the first time. An epic story in which both would team up and combine their skills to stop nothing more and nothing less than
a thief
of diamonds. And maybe to us it already sounds like a small thing, however back then it must have been something impressive to see for the children. Fortunately, after this came other crossovers. During that time, Batman appeared in some comics with Superman. However, in the same way, as in this great adventure against the Diamond Thief, they usually both fought against common criminals in stories that required more of Batman's detective skills and often involved kryptonite to weaken Superman. Remember that at this time, both were extremely popular characters, and this was the way the writers had to keep the playing field balanced. In other words, the strategy was to weaken Superman instead of making Batman stronger, something that would change with the Justice League comic. When Batman joined the Justice League, he began to interact for the first time with other superpowered characters besides Superman, such as Flash, Wonder Woman, or Green Lantern, so the writers had to find a way for Batman to be on par with them. In these comics then, we see for the first time a considerable power increase in Batman, as he fights in several missions alongside other League members against supervillains. Not only that, but it's the first time we see Batman being the tactical mind behind the team, and he is often the person who coordinates the attacks or gives them the solution to a problem. In fact, when they first faced the evil version of the Justice League, the crime syndicate of Earth 3, one of the most dangerous members of this team was precisely Owlman, the evil version of Bruce. We would continue to see this more powerful version of Batman throughout the Justice League comics, but Batman was about to return to being an extremely human character in the eyes of the viewers. In 1966, 6 years after Batman first joined the Justice League, the Batman television series starring Adam West premiered, a program that presented us with an approach peculiar of the character. The idea behind the show was that Batman should not be taken too seriously, so all his abilities were ridiculed in some way. For starters, it was a Batman who was captured by any criminal and his henchmen in every episode, who had gadgets for the most absurd situations you can imagine, like the shark-repellent bat spray. He danced, swung, and solved riddles that made no sense.
Robin, listen to these riddles. Tell me if you interpret them like I do. One, what has yellow skin and writes? A banana pen.
But the program, all things considered, had its charm and turned out to be super popular. In fact, it was so successful that this version of Batman was what people had in mind when they talked about the character. This turned Batman into a cultural icon, but it hurt the comics because readers didn't want to see these light-hearted Batman stories. Fortunately, the character would soon return to its dark origins. In 1970, Denny O'Neil, a journalist, would start writing the Batman character. His idea was to use his experience reporting on crime news to bring Batman back to these dark stories and focus on his detective skills. A Batman that would be very human again, but that wouldn't make it boring to read. In his stories, Joker returned to being the killer he was in the beginning. He introduced interesting characters like Rachel Gould, and even explored the humanity and fragility of Bruce in 993.
In this story, Bruce Wayne is in 993.
In this story, Bruce Wayne feels frustrated by the natural limitations of his body and his strength.
Unfortunately, Bruce soon begins to rely too much on these pills. He becomes careless, violent, and soon becomes addicted to them to such a degree that the person who supplies them is able to blackmail him. Finally, Bruce has to lock himself in his Batcave for a month in order to overcome his addiction. This is one of the most human stories that exist of the character, not only because we see him fall into an addiction, but also because we witness his insecurities, which lead him to try the pills in the first place, and his recovery process, in which he loses a lot of weight. We also saw this more human approach to the character in other stories like Nightfall from 1994, where Bane defeats Batman not because he's better than him in hand-to-hand combat, but because he developed a strategy in which he released the prisoners from Arkham to gradually exhaust Bruce Wayne. When Bane finally confronts Batman, he has been without sleep for days, so he easily defeats him. However, after months of work and rehabilitation, Bruce is able to recover from his injuries. This is what was happening in the solo Batman comics. However, other stories showcased a vastly different approach. One that proposed the idea that Batman could defeat Superman. In 1986, Frank Miller presented us with the historic comic The Dark Knight Returns, a story about a 50-year-old Batman who returns to fight crime after years of not doing so. This comic, during its first 3 issues, also presents us with a very human Batman who is already struggling with age, even mentions on several occasions that he got out of some trouble by pure luck. In fact, so much so that he almost dies when he confronts the leader of the mutants and Joker in a fistfight. However, in the 4th issue of the comic, we saw him develop a strategy to momentarily confront Superman using an armor that draws power from the electrical grid of Gotham City. At the end of the battle, Batman subdues Superman and tells him, "I want you to remember, Clark, in all the years to come, in your most private moments, I want you to remember my hand at your throat. I want you to remember the one man who beat you." This dialogue is the exact moment when Batman started to become extremely powerful. As it is so well written, it is positioned and it is so dramatic that it makes you forget some other details of the story, like the fact that in this battle Batman had help from Green Arrow and Robin, or that Superman really didn't want to hurt him. This battle and this story worked so well that other writers started to make stories in which Batman was able to bring gods to their knees, and one of the ones who used this type of stories the most was Grant Morrison, who didn't see Batman as a human, but rather as a god in his own right, just like all the other members of the Justice League. When Grant Morrison started writing the Justice League of America comic, he wanted to make it clear that, for him, each of the members of the Justice League was the equivalent of a mythological god, and in order to fully do this, he had to cement Batman as a character who could be on par with all the others. For this, in his first arc, he had the entire league captured by white Martians, and left Batman free to be able to rescue them. In this comic, we see how Batman, despite Superman warning them that they left the most dangerous man in the world free. In this stage of Morrison writing the League, we see how Batman confronts characters like the Wildcats or uses his abilities as a strategist to the maximum, like when he coordinates two Justice League teams from different eras in an attack against the Sun God of the 853rd century, in which he uses the most advanced computer capacity that the universe has seen in history and makes Green Lantern contain a solar explosion with pure willpower. Not only that, but it presents us with Batman with extraordinary abilities, like the fact that he has a backup personality, the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh, for when someone tries to attack his mind, or the time when Darkseid realizes that he can't clone Batman because the clones self-destruct and gouge out their eyes because no one can handle the level of stress that Batman manages.
Seriously.
By the way, speaking of stress, I'm trying to grow my Instagram profile, so if you want to vote on the topics of the new videos, it would help me a lot if you followed me there. Other writers have also cemented this idea that Batman always has a plan for everything. Such is the case with Mark Waid, who wrote a comic in which Ra's al Ghul steals the secret plans that Batman has to completely disable the Justice League in case they turn evil. A comic that was later adapted into the animated movie Justice League Doom, a story that became so popular among both comic readers and non-readers that it is usually referenced when someone discusses Batman's power levels. Another writer who did something similar was Scott Snyder in the comic Batman Endgame, in which Batman has to quickly incapacitate the Justice League when they are controlled by Joker. By this point, Batman was already an extremely powerful character, either because he has a plan to incapacitate anyone who stands in his way, and also because he was a brilliant strategist who has gadgets for every occasion. However, in recent years, this has gone even further with the introduction of the Hellbat armor and the character of the Batman who laughs. When Batman wants to retrieve Damian Wayne's body from Apocalypse, we learn of the existence of an armor that was jointly created by the entire Justice League, so that Batman could participate in extremely dangerous missions. Thanks to this, Batman is able to defeat the Parademons and face Darkseid himself in hand-to-hand combat. This armor also becomes in a hand-to-hand combat. This armor also became when the Batman who laughs made his appearance. He became one of the most popular villains in DC in a very short time. Not only because of his appearance, but because he is the ultimate representation of the fact that Batman always wins because he is Batman, which is quite popular among many people. This Batman didn't come alone to the DC universe. With him came other alternate and evil versions of Batman that combined Bruce Wayne with the power of the Green Lantern, the Speed Force, and even the powers of Doomsday. Batman. The most dangerous is the Batman who laughs, because it combines Bruce's mind with the unpredictable morality and tactics of Joker, which certainly tells us that if you bring together two extremely popular characters, the power of the script will do its thing and make them practically invincible, as it did in the DC universe during the Metal story. However, I think that sometimes we confuse the level of power with the quality of a story. For example, no matter how much I read the Metal comic, I never really click with the story or see a much more human Batman like The Long Halloween, which are infinitely better. However, this does not mean that Batman's super powerful approach does not work. In fact, comics like this one, where Batman coordinates superheroes against the most powerful computer in the universe, or cartoons like Justice League Unlimited, do an excellent job of showing a very dangerous Batman who is a very important member of the Justice League without falling into the discourse that Batman wins because he is Batman. We also have the version of Batman the Brave, a cartoon more focused on comedy, in which Batman was considered the best superhero in the entire universe and still managed to have fun, exciting, and even emotional stories. Both approaches work in Batman, and while his solo adventures usually present us with a less powerful version of the character that focuses more on his detective skills, I also love to see him fight alongside his league mates. However, it is important to remember that the most important thing of all is that the story is good and works, and that there is a point where the concept of Batman runs the risk of being ridiculous. In other words, I think we've had enough of that death metal, haven't we? Well, that's my opinion, but I'd love to know what you think. So tell me in the comments if there's a point where Batman seems too powerful to you, and remember to subscribe as it helps me a lot to continue generating content.
That's all for today. I'm Go, the Geek Monitor, and keep looking beyond the obvious.